Thank you. And yeah, hello everyone. Welcome. I'm really glad so many of you want to come and hear about this. I'm certainly excited to learn, talking to these four women and find out what they've been working on. Just to give a little bit of background, ShAFF started about 5 years ago. At that moment, there wasn't really a lot of swimming in reservoirs happening. It was a very kind of it was not a normal thing to see. It certainly hadn't been normalized. It was very rare that you would go to a reservoir and see anyone swimming. That just really didn't happen. And then over the past 5 years, anyone who lives in the Sheffield area, anyone who's swum in this area would realise just kind of how normalised it's become and how it's become, just one part of the big outdoor city lifestyle, that we all enjoy, with climbing and running and walking and all the things that happen in the Peak District and around the city. But yeah, when we first started, the hope of having a conversation with Yorkshire Water or having any kind of helpful dialogue seemed a very long way away. And one of the things that provided me a lot of hope was looking to ShAFF Reservoir near Huddersfield. And we've got Fiona Weir talking tonight, and she really, headed that campaign, a successful campaign to have clear access to that reservoir for swimming. Just to give you a bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about, it's obviously quite a big topic and there's lots of different avenues we could go down, but we try to focus it. So we're going to just talk about our motivations. Why do we want to swim in reservoirs specifically? Hear a bit about what the situation is on the ground, in terms of security patrols and all of these, nitty-gritty bits and bobs that we would rather not deal with. Then there's our aims. What's the kind of vision for the future, and what kind of projects have been underway, helping us get there. Then the third bit's all about relationships. That's, when we've been talking about this, it really comes, it's really apparent that a lot of this is about building relationships. And then the last section is, why will we not lose? We just can't lose. So just to I'm going to pass it over now to our panelists for them to introduce themselves. We've got Fiona Weir, Isobel Howie, Imogen Radford, and Suzie Wheway. Fiona, would you like to introduce yourself?
Should we do it in that order, Owen?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Fiona. As Owen said, I spearheaded the campaign at ShAFF, which is now a really long time ago. It was 2010-11 when we first turned up at ShAFF, where I'd been swimming for 25 years, to find no swimming signs and realised we had a bit of a fight on our hands. I swimming outdoors all my life. I can't actually think of a time where I didn't swim. I've got memories very young, kind of in single figures of splashing around in Welsh mountain streams and rivers that, were deep for me when I was 6. And so I always have wherever I've lived. And I think, and we'll probably come back to this a lot, but I think that the sense of the threat of having it taken away from me has tapped into something fairly primeval. Anyone who tries to stop me swimming has a fight on their hands.
I think I'm next. I'm Izzy. It says Isobel on the screen, but I'm Suzie Wheway. I live in Sheffield. I live in northwest Sheffield, and like Fiona, I've been swimming all my life. I can't remember a time when we didn't swim outdoors as a family, and for me as an adult too. I can't remember a time when I didn't swim outdoors. I've been swimming in reservoirs on and off for the last 30 years, if I'm honest. Not very frequently until the last 5 years, but for the last 5 years, I've been swimming twice a week. And for the last 3 years, I've been swimming all year round in reservoirs to me that are local to me, just up the road, about 5 miles up the road. And I work in public health, so I'm not only committed, to my well-being, but also because I know it's so important to my well-being, but I know how good swimming is for other people too, and we'll talk a lot about that, I think, as we progress. I think that the other thing I wanted to say is that I also work in behavioural change, so I'm really interested in what works and the evidence around what works when we're trying to work with people to positively influence kind of positive behaviours around water. And again, we're going to talk about that. So that's something that I'm quite passionate about. And I'm also the mother of a teenage boy, so I have quite a few irons in this fire. He's an outdoor swimmer too, and he, you know, surprisingly doesn't always do what he's told. So again, we'll touch on those sorts of themes too. I'm getting a lot of flashing on my screen. I don't know if that's affecting other people or if it's affecting how you're seeing me. That's fine, I'll relax about it.
Was I next? Sorry, I don't know, but I'll go next. My name is Imogen Radford. I'm one of the inland access officers of the Outdoor Swimming Society, and I focus particularly on sort of legality and access issues and so on. I swam when I was a child, but then there was quite a big gap when I didn't swim much, but I have now swum for the last 10 years. I'm based in Norfolk, so most of my swimming is in that area, local to me, but I have been known to visit a few lakes and reservoirs, Kinder, for example, and I'd love to live near them. They look absolutely wonderful, but yeah, so that's me.
Hello, I think that eliminates down to me, doesn't it? Marvellous. Hi everyone. So some of you who've joined our chats over the last couple of years will have already seen me on ShAFF. I'm an outdoor swim coach and wild swim guide. I'm also a swimming teacher. I'm based in the Peak District. I'm on the opposite side to Sheffield, but I kind of travel all over the place and swim locally to me, but also in some of the Yorkshire Water reservoirs. I have a background in environment. I was an environmental consultant for 15 years. I worked with all kinds of large organisations, government level, local authorities, all kinds of stuff. So kind of my background to this brings all of that together, as well as a lot of safety stuff from the water side. I do. I've done a lot of work with Swim England, with the RLSFs, on all kinds of outdoor swimming stuff. So I try and bring that into our discussions so that they've got the right knowledge and information. Yeah. Let's carry on, Owen. Crack on.
That's great. Yeah. No, so yeah, I hope everyone can see that, you know, we have this kind of, it is an expert panel. I think Matt used the word expert at the beginning of this, and I thought, you know, it is an expert panel. You know, we're extremely lucky. And when I kind of started on this journey with Sue about 5 years ago, I just hoped that people would come out of the woodwork. I just hoped, you know, as this community grows and people are passionate, people will come out of the woodwork. And I'd seen that had happened at ShAFF. You know, all these different people with different skills and expertise, and not only that, but the time and the passion. Or well, maybe they don't have the time, but they've got other things that they can not do in order to do this. No, and that's exactly what's happened, really. So it's fantastic that they're here. So I thought, for the to start with, you know, we were going to talk about our motivations. Why do we want to swim in reservoirs specifically? What is it about reservoirs? You know, why isn't this could just be a general water access campaign, but it's not. It's specifically about reservoirs. And a lot of you might have seen the 16 reasons why we need swimming access in reservoirs. It's on the OSS website, and it started as a post on the OSS Facebook group. And I just started penning out all these little ideas, and it started as 12 reasons, then it went to, you know, 13 reasons, then 14, and eventually, you know, we had this big long list, and lots of people were chipping in all the reasons. And, you know, I'm just going to run through very, very briefly. For a start, in Scottish reservoirs, they've had free open swimming access since 2003. So we know this isn't a totally crackers idea, because one country in the UK already has this. Reservoirs can meet the demand for swim places. We know there's about 2,000 reservoirs in the UK. Not necessarily all of those would be fit for swimming in, but there's a huge number of reservoirs. They have a huge potential to benefit public health. You know, we know about how good swimming can be for people and for communities. People who are there care. So this is about, you know, linking people to the environment, and all of the pressure now that's on water companies in terms of sewage pollution in rivers and in the sea. I think it's undoubted that the rise in swimming has been a big part of that. Then a few others, you know, that they're potentially very sustainable places. They're got hard-wearing banks. They're accessible, and that's something we might hear a lot about soon. You know, they're near to where people live. Yeah, have a good look through the list. I won't go through the whole thing, but I just wondered what. So we kind of know why we want to swim in reservoirs, but and lots of people already are. But I was just wondering. I was going to ask Izzy what the situation is on the ground in terms of going out swimming in reservoirs around Sheffield, in Yorkshire Water reservoirs. What's the actual reality of doing that at the moment?
Well, at the moment, it's pretty easy, actually, Owen. I mean, I think, you know, they are accessible in some ways, but I think we want to touch on later, you know, how they could be made even more accessible to a wider range of people. But actually, you know, it's pretty easy to get to a reservoir, particularly if you've got your own transport, but there is public transport as well. But one of the things that's been difficult is the culture, to be honest, around swimming in reservoirs. You know, we have a culture, an unhelpful culture at the moment in the country. It's shifting, it is changing, where reservoirs are being seen as out of bounds and they're prohibited places, and some of them even have bylaws on them that do prohibit in common law access, and again we'll talk about that later. But and that's unfortunately, because there's been such a rise in numbers of people swimming in reservoirs, that's been challenging for people. And particularly over COVID, you know, when there were no swimming pools open, there was an even bigger increase in people using reservoirs as an amenity, and that caused quite a lot of tension, I think, in communities, not least for people who live locally, because there was, you know, an influx of a lot of people, and that was quite challenging just in terms of kind of infrastructure stuff, you know, getting roads and parking and people, just a lot more people being around, and that raised a lot of anxiety, I think, and it has raised a lot of anxiety for people about whether reservoirs are safe, because we've been told for years that they're not. And again, we're going to talk a bit more about some of the myths and misconceptions around safety and hazards and how to avoid that. But I think what unfortunately happened is that Yorkshire Water, it caused a lot of anxiety for Yorkshire Water employees, and ultimately led to Yorkshire Water deploying a security detail. And that was unfortunate, really, because they patrolled in high vis, they were security guards. We've had very few of them this year, but we had a lot of deployment during 2021. And it caused quite a bit of distress amongst people, because people weren't used to being kind of policed in that way. And there were infrequent occasions when there were dogs deployed, but they weren't supposed to be there. But they were there, and that was quite distressing for people. And there was a bit of aggressive practice as well. So we've been quite fortunate, I think, this year that there hasn't been quite the same deployment, but it did create quite a lot of difficulty. And unfortunately, as I say, because they were security guards, they weren't necessarily used to engaging with the public around water safety. And you know, to our mind, and again, we'll talk about this more, it was a bit of a wasted opportunity for the company to engage with people on a positive water safety culture. And it threw up, you know, difficulties around, you know, them not being there to tackle antisocial behaviour, and you know, swimmers have quite a lot of anxiety around fire risk, particularly in dry summers. So there was a lost opportunity there, and a kind of a misplacement, but also it did mean that a small number of swimmers were deterred by the security guards, but interestingly, not that many. So it wasn't really that cost effective either. You know, if it was about prohibiting swimming, it didn't really stop swimming. And equally, it didn't really resolve some of the problems that the community had around potential for antisocial behaviour and, as I say, fires. So we've been trying to kind of shift that narrative to try and encourage the water companies to look at more of a ranger model.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I think the police, you know, these security firms were calling the police, weren't they, when they were seeing swimmers? And I thought the police had a very measured response, really.
Yeah.
And actually they were, you know, we had this encounter with the police at Agden, and they were kind of looking at the scene, and there was hundreds of people in the water and boats, and you know, it looked like a kind of Greek island beach scene. And we said, you know, those kids over there, the ones that are swimming just by the spillway, they're the ones you want to go and talk to. And the police said, yeah, you know, you're right. and they went off and did that. But the police were very clear, and I think that these private security firms had a bit of a hard time from the police, you know, about wasting their time.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that, you know, not all of the security guards were aggressive. You know, some of them were actually really decent people who were just trying to do a job and do it fairly and equitably. And they also, I think, struggled, you know, because they couldn't actually see the difficulties that there were there. And yet, you know, as I say, there were anxieties for swimmers, that there were people who weren't used to being around water and perhaps potentially at risk that weren't being addressed.
Yeah, I mean, we all got a bit paranoid about, you know, are we actually going to get prosecuted? You know, are people, what's the detail in all this? And I remember looking up whether or not a private security firm could use the number plate from my car and go through the DVLA to find my name and address, to send me, you know, to start sending me letters, you know, about the bylaw. And we had to kind of look into all of this and figure out if it was true, because some of these security firms were threatening that they would do that. They were kind of, well, we'll take a photo of your license plate, and that's how we'll find your name and address. But obviously, you know, a lot
they can't. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Suzie, is there what's it like outside of Yorkshire? You know, and this discussion is mostly going to be about Yorkshire Water, but people around the country will be interested in other water companies. What's the general attitude outside of you know, the green pleasant hills of Yorkshire?
Yeah, so Scottish Water don't have a choice, so that's fine. They're kind of written off. Everywhere else, they vary in willingness to talk about it. There is a water industry standard that they don't allow swimming, full stop. There are a few who have allowed it for organised venue, so kind of really deeply supervised, specific times you've got to pay, you've got to kind of show competence and all this kind of stuff, which venues are great. They work for a lot of people. They are part of the picture of access. It's absolutely not a case of it's one or the other. They're great places for people to learn and meet other people, but they are not the whole picture, and they don't suit everyone. Not everyone can afford it. Not everyone can get to the specific times. So across the board, it is no swimming. Now, it depends where you go and which water authority or water owner you access. So my local waters are owned by the Canal and River Trust, and I don't think they have the resources or the energy to enforce their no swimming policy. So you're not going to get told off, locally to me at least, by a Canal and River Trust employee. They just kind of turn a blind eye. You will get told off by other water users there. That has started to ease in the last few years because they've realised it's actually not worth the aggro. United Utilities, who is my other neighbouring water authority, they are hardline. Yorkshire Water are at least willing to talk to us. Of all the water authorities I've come across and spoken to friends that are in the water industry, says, nah, they're just so anti-swimming, they're not going to entertain it. I've been on a few kind of water company events where, so Thames Water and Severn Trent are looking much more at bathing waters, and it's more from a water quality perspective, but they are starting to have to be a little bit more open-minded to it. Generally, though, the answer is no. You will get told off.
And sometimes it's quite a polite telling off, isn't it?
Yeah.
I always like, you know, so many people are afraid that it's a screaming person, you know, waving a stick, but it's really not. It's generally kind of, you know, the equivalent of having a discussion with your next door neighbour about, you know, who's really been in the way of the drive or something. It's quite.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what I do want to say is I've been swimming outdoors regularly for 7-8 years now. I think I've had 2 or 3 incidents where I've been approached and been asked to leave. I swim pretty much every day in the summer, 2, 3, 4 times a week during the winter. It's, you know, it's unlikely that you're going to get told off. Admittedly, I try and go at times of day when I know there aren't going to be people there and I'm not going to conflict with other users. But still, I don't, you know, what we need to do more and more is get people swimming and get people in there, because then it erodes that assumption. I think there is a very specific thing because of soup. there are lots of people who access reservoirs in this area, across the Peak and the North Pennines. As you go further south, I don't think that happens as much. Yeah, we need to build that southern presence of trespassing.
Yeah, I think that it's calmed down quite significantly. I mean, I don't want to labour the point, but I noticed in the chat somebody was a bit scared of, moving to Sheffield and missing out on being able to swim. Our experience was that getting told off didn't deter people. It did deter a few, particularly if it was aggressive, but we've tried to encourage them not to take an aggressive stance, and there is safety in numbers. And we have soup, sorry, not sup, if there was a query there. It really, I would just reassure people that there is an active swimming culture in this area now, and we are starting to shift that. So, your chances of getting told off are significantly reduced to how they were, and hopefully it will stay like that. But we'll talk about where we're heading a little later on.
Yeah, I think that leads us perfectly on to the next question, really, which is, clearly lots of people are swimming in the reservoirs anyway, and the rules are very ineffective at stopping us. So why do we actually need to change the rules? Why do we want a change in policy? So Fiona, is that, do you have any thoughts on that?
I've got loads of thoughts on this. I mean, I think there are two key words that I'd give, sort of say up front, and that's access and exclusion. So it's interesting, isn't it, that people are breaking the rules, and most of the people who are breaking the rules know that they're breaking the rules, and yet we're not a huge bunch of rebels. We're not all, out on the barricades. We're simply digging our heels in and insisting that we should be allowed to do something that we really love doing and we recognise gives us lots. And so for me, the thing about, why do we need a change of approach? Why don't we just kind of carry on doing what we're doing? Comes down to the fact that ignoring no swimming signs is fine for lots of people, and it does work, and it's widened access. The bunch of people who've been doing it, me included, some of the time, we've widened access and we've got more people swimming, but it doesn't work for everybody. And I have an equity interest, I kind of in my professional life and my personal life. So I think there are groups of people for whom just ignoring the signs is a much more risky, much more difficult strategy. So for young men, for instance, if they ignore the rules, they tend to get arrested. For people from Black and ethnic minority communities, that's also true. If it's much more risky to break the law if you're a Black person. There are also issues around, this is really going to be upmost in people's minds at the moment with the cost of living crisis, but the kind of equity and access that comes from what you can afford. I swam outdoors with my kids all the way through their teenage years because I was a single parent and I simply couldn't afford to take them to the swimming baths, couldn't afford it. So we swam in Bath instead. It's our resource. Nobody charges me a £5 to climb a hill. Why should they have the right to stop me or charge me for swimming in my local reservoir? And then I guess more recently, I have another interest, which is I have become progressively over the last since the ShAFF campaign, really the last 10 years, progressively more and more disabled, and I am now really quite disabled. And so I have an interest in reservoirs because they are potentially the most perfect outdoor swimming venue. They don't have tides that are going to knock me off my feet. They have relatively level access. They often have things you can hang on to get into the water. So there's a potential fantastic resource for people like me who cut the number of places I can swim safely are diminishing, and there's a whole bunch of reservoirs I could get into if only they didn't have fences around them or locked padlock gates. And so I've got a little bit of a thing about that as well, and that kind of very personal drive. So I guess that's Yeah, I think, and I think those are my reasons, but I think everyone who continues to swim has a passion, a bit, you know, their own reason for that, whether it's their own mental health or their physical health or swimming with their kids or the thing they've discovered that makes it worth getting up in the morning or whatever it is. And that's why it's worth kind of widening that that access and opening it up to people who, unlike us, haven't found out how wonderful this is yet.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It doesn't need to be a dirty little secret. You know, this is something that's fabulous, and we should be proud of, and it should be embraced. You know, and then everyone can share in that, as you say. To move on then to kind of the work that you've been doing. There's two main projects that I've been very aware of, and that is the swimmer's perspective presentation, which is something that you can all watch on YouTube after this. And this was a presentation that Fiona gave to to some people at Yorkshire Water. So if you could tell us a bit about that. And then the other thing is the Reservoir Hazard Survey, which is a project that the viewers might have seen around on Facebook and Instagram, where we've been encouraging people to take part. So yeah, tell us about the swimmer's perspective presentation and kind of what the aim of that was.
Yeah, so well, I guess the aim was, we had a decision early on. We were invited, Imogen gave a presentation at a national water safety event, and we were then invited to come and talk to Yorkshire Water. And Imogen kind of asked around a group of us who were in swimming in Yorkshire, and we kind of almost accidentally ended up being the people who said yes. And we had a choice quite early on about how that relationship, so it's all about building relationships, and we'll probably come back to that a lot, but we had a choice about whether we were going to fight them or try and work with them. And I guess that's an ongoing thing, that's a dynamic that hasn't finished. But the swimmer's perspective presentation was very much coming from the point of view of, okay, we want to work with you. Here's all our cards on the table. This is what we know. This is what we believe. These are the arguments that we think make reservoir swimming, you know, so fantastic and kind of unavoidable. These are the things you worry, we know you worry about, that will help you sort out. It was a kind of like, we did some research. We asked people what their feelings were about swimming. We did a lot of kind of, Imogen pulled together lots of the legal stuff, and we pulled together this presentation to kind of lay all the cards on the table and make sure that the starting point for them and for us and for anybody else who wants to borrow that pack and transfer it to their own area, that we were all kind of starting from it was a level playing field, really. Everybody's got access to the same information, and we all know where we're coming from. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And if people want to watch that, it's in the links that you'll get after this presentation. So it's something you can all go and look at, and I think it's a great kind of resource and a blueprint for other people's campaigns. And then the other thing was the Reservoir Hazard Survey, which I find really exciting. And you know, the whole thing that reservoirs have these big dangerous things lurking underneath, you know, and that kind of that fear that's put into swimmers when we see that on signs. It's really great to be able to answer that with proper research, isn't it? So just tell us kind of how this is working.
Yeah, it is really exciting. It's also a little bit terrifying because it's potentially quite a big thing. So I mean, it's spun out of exactly as you said. You know, there is this myth that reservoirs are really dangerous and there's lots of stuff under the water there. And then we found ourselves in early summer with water levels dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. And some of us knew from our own individual, you know, places we knew really well that there weren't any underwater hazards. But suddenly we had reservoir after reservoir after reservoir where you could see what was under the water because it wasn't under the water anymore. So we just had this idea that we could maybe start to collect that information in a systematic way. Last year we asked Yorkshire Water whether they had a reservoir hazards database of any kind, and they don't. So they don't. So that information wasn't there already. So we started to collect it, and we have. It's been a little bit interrupted because I had an episode of I was quite seriously ill in the summer, so it kind of just around about the deadline, it all just went on hold, which is why we've got to now decide what we do with it. But we've got something like 40 now, I think, reservoirs, and the bulk of them are either in Yorkshire or they're in Wales, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs. So if we put a shout out a while ago for anybody who wanted to help us analyse that data, and if there are any of you on the call today who've got data and analysis skills, then please do give us a shout, because we would really love that. But you know, and what we do with that, there's a little bit of me that thinks we should keep it open forever. You know, that we could make a website that was crowdsourced that people could keep on adding to. And maybe we all do that, but that would take funding, and it would take some, you know, kind of human resources to maintain it. So what we will do with that information is share it. But what we'd like to be able to do with it is to analyse it before we share it, so that we can say some sensible things, so that we can say some things like, you know, I don't know, 60% of reservoirs don't have any hidden hazards, or there are going to be some hazards. There was some, and for me, one of the most interesting things was that the hazards that were exposed, you know, there were things that so mud, for instance. I'd never really thought about mud as being a major reservoir hazard, because I swim in a place that's got stone sides. So I stand on stone when I get, you know, most often when I get into a reservoir. But suddenly there were reservoirs where there were actually some fire brigade call outs to people who got stuck in, I think it was Agden, but one of the bigger reservoirs that was very, very muddy. And so I think the hazards that will come out aren't going to be all of the things that we expect them to be. And we'll have some really concrete information about what the realities are of the hazards of reservoirs rather than the myths. So as far as I know, nobody's taken a photograph of a giant pike.
I can just imagine if
or a giant pipe for that matter. No giant pikes or pipes have been exposed by the very dry summer that we've had. But every year we do get people stuck in mud, usually at Ladybower, at the bottom of reservoirs that have dropped in height, you know. So it's quite right to say that's one of the major hazards when the levels drop.
I think what's great about these two projects, the hazard survey and the Swimmers Perspective presentation, is essentially you're almost doing Yorkshire Water's work for them. You've done the research and you're handing it to them on a plate, easily digestible, cut up into little pieces. And you know, if I was working at Yorkshire Water and I was, you know, this is my career and I was having to deal with these swimmers and what a headache it is, I would be very grateful that you guys have put that information together so clearly. So to move on, can you all hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Just to move on, I was wondering what if Suzie, if you could tell us a little bit about what the common ground is, just briefly about what the common ground is between swimmers and the water company. What are the things that we agree on?
I think the big one is we all want to keep people safe. You know, there are inherent risks to outdoor swimming. Millions of people do it safely every year now. It isn't, you know, what we've been led to believe that you are instantly going to die if you get into cold water. You know, we're proving that on a daily basis. Swimmers want to keep other swimmers safe. The water companies want to keep other swimmers safe, and their approach, as with a lot of landowners across England in particular, is that, well, we just ban everything. But that doesn't work. Saying to let's have an analogy here, saying to a teenager the best way to not get pregnant is to not have sex doesn't work. Abstinence only sex education doesn't work. It's the same approach here. If you tell someone not to go into something, they're much more tempted to do it. And time again, you know, we know that people go into water on a hot day. Let's not be naive. You know, we can do it at the coast, which is a far higher risk environment, than a reservoir or an inland lake. And they, to my mind, there's no swimming stands and there's no, we just don't allow it, we're not even talking about it. It's potentially negligent because they're not educating. They could end up in the position that somebody has an incident at their reservoir and a coroner says, well, hang on a minute, you know that people are swimming there. What have you put in place to prevent that incident happening? And if all they've done is put a no swimming sign up, there's going to come a point where the coroner's going to turn around and said, that isn't enough, mate. You should have done more. You should have educated. You should have had more information waterside. You should have engaged with those more at-risk groups. And let's be really clear here, there are very clear at-risk demographics who are more likely to get into difficulty. So really that's our big common ground, is the safety side of it. But there's also environment as well. You know, everyone who swims outdoors comes back and says how much they value their environment more. And that extends into other parts of life as well, in the way that they live, in the way that they volunteer, maybe get involved in other projects. And the water companies need to protect those environments. They have an obligation to do so under their statutory duties. Also, protecting the environment helps to keep their water quality better. There's a two-way thing. So they're the really two big key things for me, I think.
Yeah, to move on, I think some of the so we do have this kind of shared ground, but so much of what we hear is there's a lot of myths and misconceptions in this whole discussion. And we've already got a question in about insurance, and this is kind of one of the things that water companies will often cite as, you know, we don't have the insurance, or you wouldn't be insured, or etc. I was wondering, Imogen, you know, for those who don't know Imogen, she has a really fantastic website called Imogen's River Swims, and it's kind of like, it's like the OSS website, but with a lot more detail and a lot more kind of in-depth analysis and all the links and everything, and all the citations. But yeah, Imogen, in terms of the myths and misconceptions, what do you think are some of the really big issues, and can you kind of blow those out the water?
Well, safety, Susie's already talked about that one, so I won't say any more at the moment. But the other two are probably, and Susie's also mentioned the risk of drowning, or the risk of harm. And that's a big misconception amongst everybody, including the water companies, that it's really, really dangerous to go swimming inland and you're bound to die. Well, it's not true. And obviously, we all care very deeply and don't want anyone to drown or die. But the chances of that happening are extremely low. And we see the statistics, national statistics that come out every year, and analyse them. And a small proportion are actually swimming. Most people who drown fell in, or perhaps we're doing some other more dangerous activity. And the chances are very low, literally very low, if you look at a scale of risk. So it's important to keep that in proportion, and also balance it against the benefits, which again we've heard about. So that's a big myth. And then the other big myth is landowner liability. Almost all landowners and water companies seem to be under the impression that they're likely to be liable should something happen to somebody, injury or death. And that simply is not the case. Case law is, and also criminal law, is very clearly established now. It's very, very, very set, really. That a person who willingly goes into the water can, if somebody willingly goes into the water and something happens to them, they cannot successfully sue a landowner. All a landowner needs to do is warn about very unusual or unseen risks, and they need to assess to do that. So perhaps we're helping Yorkshire Water with some of these supposed hazards, but as long as they do that, they're highly unlikely to be liable. So those are two of the myths and misconceptions, and some of the safety myths to do with, I won't go into detail, but there's the cold, the deep, the potential hazards we've talked about, seem to be so widespread that we really do need to tackle them. So I think Izzy's looking at this in a bit more detail.
Well, I think it's been touched on already that, you know, there are things that we can do to kind of recognise the real hazards of being around open water, and potentially where there are some specific hazards that they should be properly signed. You know, so one of the bits of engagement that we've had with Yorkshire Water is to get them to focus on those that are at most risk. and not to kind of just have this blanket sort of approach, which it doesn't really help anybody. So actually focusing down on potential for people around cold water shock and around, you know, potential sort of jumping hazards or things like that, but also to engage properly, you know. So if we actually want to keep people safe around open water, we need to tell the truth. You know, we need to actually have accurate signage. We need to have accurate campaigns that are targeted towards the people at most risk. And one of the things that we've been doing is trying to encourage them, you know, to actually engage with water safety forums and people like that who can actually guide them in this, and not just us as volunteers, you know, doing it for them. There are people out there who can work with them and help them generate those campaigns. But I think it's important that we do try and counter, debunk, if you like, some of these myths and misconceptions, because they don't help. They don't keep people safe. And actually what swimmers are interested in is spreading that water safety culture so that we can keep each other safe and others. So I think we've been very successful at doing that, you know, through the groups, the informal groups like SOUP and Kapows and others in this area and in this region, I should say. But more generally, I think the Outdoor Swimming Society has done a fantastic job in debunking some of those myths for people and actually providing people with better information around that. And there are some brilliant campaigns from your water safety forums like Float to Live, you know, which we really should be getting those with influence to actually use and focus. So that's the sort of thing that we've been trying to work with them around.
Suzie, could you tell us a bit more about, so we've talked about the kind of the myths and misconceptions, but what are the genuine issues that do need to be managed? And we've got a few questions that are, you know, asking about the risk of spreading invasive non-native aquatic plants, about the impact of just having too many people at the site, and also the impact on wildlife.
Yeah, so the safety concerns are standard for every kind of anyone who takes part in outdoor swimming. It's the water's potentially very deep, it's potentially quite cold, although it varies a lot during the year, and that's people having the basic knowledge and going out and finding out, knowing they can swim, understanding how to swim in outdoor water. You know, I think the majority of people who join a big Facebook group like SOUP, they are there because they want to learn and they want to learn this information. Getting that information across to the people who maybe don't look for it, that is the challenge. You're going to have to say all those things to me again, Owen, because it's gone instantly out of my head.
So specifically, people were asking about the impact of a spot just becoming too popular, too many people, and about the impact on wildlife in general of an increase in swimming, and things like invasive aquatic plants. Yeah,
so the popularity issue is a big problem, but one which is massively exacerbated by us not having wider access. So somebody finds a spot where you can get away with it, and you know you can go without getting hassle, or you know what time you can go, that spreads on social media. Someone will geotag it on Instagram with like 20,000, 50,000 followers. So it gets inundated. It's completely understandable. We can't control that. But what we can do, if we have wider access, we get rid of these honeypot sites where everybody ends up, and people can spread out all over the place. So the numbers are balanced. I mean, where I swim does get hammered in the summer. We have had problems, but it's like, you know, a couple of weekends a year when it's sunny. I know there's a campaign over in Cheshire at the minute because it's the water body is being threatened with being fenced in. For the sake of what is a couple of weekends a year, it's going to mean that local residents can't access the water to feed the ducks, never mind go swimming or paddleboarding. And it's, you know, it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't fix the problems. We need better access. How we can help that is by telling, you know, on these social media groups, making it clear that these are the busy points. And say to people, well, if you turn up and it's really busy, think about walking away and coming back at a quieter time. Try and spread that swimmer load out. Be considerate. Take rubbish bags and stuff with you. It's none of it's difficult. There's a lot of common sense going on here. Kat's on, who started the campaign at Pick Me. Hi, Kat. I hope this is useful.
I just sorry, just to chip in, because what's leaping into my head is pictures of crowded beaches at bank holiday weekends.
Yeah.
And that is worth saying from a cultural point of view.
I agree.
Nobody sees Brighton Beach on the news with 70 million people packed in shoulder to shoulder and says, oh, we should stop people swimming on beaches. And so the thing about reservoir, we don't think in the same way about reservoirs, swimming resources as we do about beaches. And we've got to find a way of kind of going, yes, okay, somewhere like Pickmere or it happened with ShAFF actually. As Suzie says, it's become a honeypot. Let's get people elsewhere. Let's spread information. But it doesn't mean we should stop people swimming there. It means we need to think in different ways about how we manage that.
And actually, in northwest Sheffield, there are quite a few reservoirs, and you can get away from the crowds. There are ones that are more easily accessible and potentially better places for people who are unused to being around open water, where they could be more tightly kind of monitored, so that we do reduce any concerns. But actually there's lots and lots of scope to get away and to reduce that kind of load on the environment.
Yeah, I think in terms of that wildlife question, I saw it in the chat. A lot of reservoirs are eminently suitable for swimming because they actually have a less important habitat than a lot of other natural water bodies, because the water levels rise and fall so much during a year. There is less opportunity for really important habitats to establish. That doesn't mean that there won't be breeding birds on site, that there couldn't be water voles, that there couldn't be. We have some really rare obscure moss in our reservoir, but they're only at, we've got freshwater mussels in ours as well, actually, thinking about it, but they're only at risk at a certain time of year in a certain area. So what we can do as swimmers is communicate that to other swimmers and say, look, these are the points you need to avoid, the times of year you need to avoid, how to respect that environment in a good way. The more swimmers go, the more they're actually likely to respect it and spread that information. There's really clear evidence that the more people engage with nature, whether it's swimming, green space, whatever, being in the woods, the more they will respect their environment. The detachment we have from the natural world now with very urban living is part of our problem in general, on a broader environment sense anyway. So the more we can get them in, the better.
It seems like, I think the outdoor swimming community as a whole, we're very good at being communicative, about bringing people in and sharing good information. And I was wondering, Izzy, if you wanted to tell us a bit about why the swimming community is so good at running campaigns and getting things done.
Well, I think you've just said it. I think, we are a very knowledgeable group of people. I mean, we're a vast number of people as well who've got a massive wealth of experience. We're usually people who care deeply about the outdoors and about preserving the beautiful places around us. Our Sheffield lakelands are a particular focus, and as Suzie said, actually, I've taken much more of an interest in these past few years because of work by the Wildlife Trust and others and I know that swimmers locally are engaged in those sorts of activities. I know that as Suzie said, that people take bags out with them and they do clear hazards, the hazards to wildlife. But so I think we are people who care deeply about the environment, and I think we care people who care about well-being. I think that often we're people who care about equity and actually sharing places responsibly. But I think Fiona said it earlier. I think it might have surprised Yorkshire Water and others that we're not a bunch of strange kind of antisocial. I'm trying to think of all those words that get hurled at people. When they're hooligans. Yeah. I mean, actually, swimmers do try and intervene, carefully if there is stuff going off, like fires being lit at times of year where we've got risk of fire, because we have a major risk of fire sometimes, believe it or not. I know people who are from the south who might be on this call might be going, oh no, it's always cold and wet in the north. it isn't, it really isn't. And we've had real kind of concerns around antisocial behaviour and fire risk. And I know that swimmers have been very active in trying to kind of provide that supportive community. We're also, as I said earlier, a very knowledgeable bunch, and we are really keen to kind of shift this narrative, to shift this norm, so that actually swimming is seen as normal in our lakelands. You know, these are our lakelands. They might have been dammed, and they might have been, some of them might have been created artificially, but they are the lakelands that have surrounded this city, which is, Sheffield is the outdoor city. I just want to put a plug in there for what a fantastic place it is to come and visit. Because we have this fantastic natural environment, and we want to shift that norm. We want to actually help and work with Yorkshire Water, with the emergency services, with the landowners, with the council, with anyone who has influence. We want to work with people who can actually help us move this forward in a very positive way. We're very passionate. I think that's why.
Passionate, yeah. Owen, can I just chip in and say something? Because Izzy said we're very knowledgeable, and I'm conscious that we talked before in our preparation, and we haven't now, about some of the knowledge that might be useful for other people who want to build relationships with other water companies. The things that we've learned, not just about swimming, but about working with big organisations. And there are lots of takeaways. You know, I think all of us, I think Yorkshire Water probably underestimated us. I think, you know, there are so many swimmers that there's this, you know, that in any group of swimmers swimming in any particular place, there are some people who really know how to negotiate, who really know how to research, who really know, you know, just about any skill that you need in negotiations with a big company, you'll find it among this huge population of swimmers now. But we've learned along the way, we've learned that they underestimate us, and that's actually gives us a potential advantage to start with. They thought that we were just a bunch of, I don't know, middle-aged housewives, I think is what they thought. And they know.
Well, with that too, some of us.
We might be as well.
As well.
As well. We've learned that you have to work hard to build a relationship and to get some respect. We've learned that we have to make and to be treated as important. We've learned that we had to make decisions at different points about whether we were going to be good, play nice, or whether we were going to be a bit naughty and play a bit harder. And we don't always do the same thing. You know, I think we do a little bit of, I think I show my age if I say Mutt and Jeff. So, you know, we kind of within our meetings, you know, one of us will play a bit harder and one of us will be a bit softer, and we sort of take on roles. We're better informed than the water companies about almost all the facts, apart from the actual physical structures of their reservoirs, which they obviously know more than we do. We're better informed about water safety. We're better informed about the statistics. We're better informed about the law, you know, all of this stuff around water. They weren't expecting that. The other thing we've learned is that there's personnel change in big organisations. People come and go, and that you build a really good relationship and then that person leaves to get another job, or they get sacked or something. You have to build it all over again with somebody new. And I suppose the most important thing is that it takes time. And I think we were lucky that there were those of us who sat down with Yorkshire Water first 2 and a bit years ago. We already were experienced enough to know that it was going to take years, not months. Because I think some people who don't know that might get really frustrated with all the things that we've kind of learned along the way, that, you know, they think it's going to be a quick fix because it's so obvious that this should be done. And you know, and that kind of cyclical thing of having to work with a big organisation that keeps changing itself, and so you have to keep coming back to it. Takes years to get big organisations to change. And we've learned some stuff about like making use of politicians, for instance. So that's just a kind of a whistle stop I wanted to squeeze in, the kind of, for the other people who might be listening to this and thinking, well, how did you, because we're not a special bunch of people, you could take somewhere to your own area and run your own campaigns.
I think your experience at ShAFF was important as well, wasn't it, Fiona? Because that came from politicians. So ShAFF has got permission to swim. It is a place that is allowed to swim. It's a Canal and Rivers Trust owned reservoir. It's quite small, but it's still a reservoir. So Fiona led or was very involved in the campaign for that, wasn't it? But I think there was a lot of political angle to that got it going. Is that right?
Well, just in completely shamelessly, I went to all the local councillors and the MP and said, you know, here's this lovely non-political, non-party political thing. Swimming in reservoirs, isn't that lovely? Will you help us? And our timing happened to be great, because by the time we talked to them, it was kind of like February, and there were May elections coming up. And so they fell over each other to be helpful. And having the MP, we had this. I still have the vision of the scene in my head, because Yorkshire Water approached from one end of ShAFF and we approached from the other end of ShAFF, and we met in the middle with the MP. It was kind of like, it's like some kind of cowboy showdown. But it was really helpful to have politicians to kind of get people round the table. Sorry, I said Yorkshire Water and I mean CRT, to get CRT round the table initially.
I realised so we have quite little time left, and there was just those two main questions that I wanted to get in before the end. One was something I forgot to ask earlier, and this is to Izzy. It's about what's the vision for the future. What is it that you're that you'd like to see happen, or what is it that you're proposing that you'd like to see in terms of access at reservoirs?
Well, I think I said it earlier. I think, you know, that one thing that unites us all is we are so passionate about the benefits of swimming to people, to ourselves and to others, that we want to just see swimming in reservoirs as being normal, you know, as normal as it is in lakes and the sea and rivers. You know, I mean, I'm not a keen river swimmer myself. I know Imogen is, and her ears are probably pricking up at this. But we just want to see that it's a normal activity, that it's not called wild swimming, because actually some of our reservoirs aren't that wild. They're quite benign stretches of water, really, and some of them aren't very wild in their nature because they have been managed. So we just want it to be seen as normal. And actually at times our local reservoirs can feel just like the local pool, really. You know, that's how it feels sometimes at its best. And really that, I would say, is the main vision. And that with that comes this positive culture around water safety, that, you know, that we build understanding of how to be to enjoy being around open water, to not be afraid of it, but to actually take care of ourselves and others around it. So I think that's our main vision. And it's interesting that Fiona touched on the role of politicians and the role of policy. You know, we do need a policy change, because we do need people not to be fearful of actually accessing their blue spaces. You know, we need that to be a policy approach as much as it is a managerial approach by the landlord. And we've got ideas, you know, about broadening out what we're doing, to not just having that positive dialogue, which we're very keen to maintain despite the kind of the churn of staff that's happened in Yorkshire Water. We're really keen to keep those communication channels open, but we've actually got positive ideas around positive PR campaigns locally, and working with our local policymakers, you know, to actually broaden out that access and actually get that more enshrined as a right, you know, than it is currently, because that would allow all of those positive things to follow around safety and around equality of access and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's potentially more of a relationship, you know, between the Right to Roam campaign and the outdoor swimming community. You know, they're already doing fantastic work, and you know, there's already been a lot of mutual support there. But that's
well, as Fiona said right at the outset, we don't get charged for going up Kinder. You know, we don't. And I've been going up Kinder in the local peaks around here all my life, and I don't get charged for that. I do get asked to stick to the footpaths and to observe certain kind of safety and considerations for nature, but I don't get told I can't do it, and I don't get charged to do it.
And also the other thing about hills, the parallel I like to remember is that people use them in different ways. And people, so this thing about people should be able to use our reservoirs in different ways. There is space for the youths who want to splash out and take their kayaks and you know, and the nice middle-aged ladies who want to swim heads up and eat ache, and she says being one, and the athletes who want to, you know, zoom up and down. And the same is of all our outdoor spaces. People use them in different ways according to what they love doing, and we should be able to do the same with reservoirs.
So why won't we lose? Tell me then. Why will we not want to lose?
Well, the tide's turned. There's too many of us. There's 7 million people swimming outdoors in just in England, never mind Wales and Scotland. 7 million people. There's too many of us now, and almost. I mean, there'll probably be a couple of people on this call who aren't swimming outdoors yet, but most people will know it's such a buzz. There's nothing like it. Once you found it, you know, you're going to fight to keep it. And I think the water companies haven't quite got their head around how passion driven this is. You know, and they're not going to, they've got a choice really. They can either wake up to the fact that they're never going to stop swimming, and they can act with us as swimmers to get ahead of the curve and look at safer swimming and to change policies and practices, or they can continue to oppose swimming and they need to be prepared for a fight. I mean, it's like, you know, trespass, legal action, whatever is going to happen. It's too late to stop it. That's why we can't be beaten.
And I think that's right. I think that, you know, the social norms have changed. You know, they're really powerful social norms. We do what other people do around us, whether that's positive or negative. And people, as Fiona have said, have seen the positives and how actually normal people swimming in reservoirs can be. And I think those social norms are shifting, you know, and I think people's attitudes are shifting. And unfortunately, I don't think those who are managing our bodies of water are quite keeping up with the zeitgeist, as Fiona said. You know, it's shifted, the tide has turned, and it's very positive.
Yeah, I think just looking at SOUP or other outdoor, you know, these Facebook groups or the kind of outdoor swimming Instagram community, and it's just this kind of endless stream of smiles and people discovering what's on their doorstep and discovering, you know, enjoying their bodies, getting to know new friends, having these amazing experiences. And I think, you know, I would always like to thank, you know, the community. It's the people who go out swimming every day, or, you know, every week, or maybe they just go out once a year. But it is the community that has made all this possible, isn't it? Just us 5 people trying to have meetings with Yorkshire Water, sending, you know, emails and letters and all the rest of it. It doesn't work when you don't have this huge army, you know, this tidal wave, as we're calling it, when you don't have the tidal wave behind us of people and that unstoppable army of ferociously cake eating swimmers.
There's a lot.
I think it's
there is a little
in the chat.
there is a little plea there, Owen, for people to not just fight for their own personal rights to swim, but to you know, that thing we talked about earlier, widening access for people who are maybe
I agree
to swim. And we, you know, it's water. It's part of the country, isn't it? It's ours. It ought to be for all of us. I feel like a leveler now. I might break into song, but you know, it's a common trait for all of us to share.
Yeah, totally. It's common treasury for all of us to share. I think what struck me though when you were talking, Owen, is the fact that we are such a large community, and I think there are things that people can do individually. You know, don't fight shy of talking to your policymakers. Don't you know, do engage positively with people who maybe raise myths about swimming in reservoirs or are concerned about others. You know, there are things that you can do. There's things that we can all do. And just because us 5 have been actively working on this. I know that there's lots of other people have as well, and I would just encourage anybody to get involved. And if you want to get involved, you know, there's lots and lots of things that everyone can do, and not least that is spreading those kind of good benefits, but also spreading those water safety messages, particularly to groups like my lad, you know, teenagers who aren't always listening to us old ladies, you know, sorry, me as an old lady.
No, that's fantastic. I just the last thing that I just wanted to add before we kind of wrap it up is, if people do have their own their own water safety, you know, sorry, their own water access campaigns that they would like to get started in their local area, you want to join the Outdoor Swimming Society Inland Access Group on Facebook. You can look them up on the OSS website too, where we have the Inland Access Guide. And these are linked in the list of links that Matt will send you as well. So that's a free PDF guide with case studies and a lot of the key information's there outlined. And then also go to Imogen's website, Imogen's River Swims, where you can find even more detailed information on that. And you know, we're here, myself, Imogen, other people who are part of the Inland Access group, and we're there through the Facebook group, or you could even email it if you have questions. But I would just like to say a huge thank you to Fiona, Izzy, Imogen, and Suzie. And of course to ShAFF as well for hosting us, and for all of you that have come along to join in. I hope you can give a donation. You know, if you'd like to do that, if you'd like to support us, and to support Sheffield Adventure Film Festival, which is a fantastic film festival. But yeah, unless anyone has one last thing they'd like to say, I'm going to hand it back to Matt.
And I would love to see the chat, Anna. Are you gonna, Anna or Matt, are you gonna save it for us?
Yeah, that'll all get sent.
I can't follow conversation and read chat, so I'm sorry if anybody's been trying to back me out.
Yeah, over to me. Thank you very much.
I've got one little closing remark.
Of course you do.
Is it about cake?
It's not about. No, I've not mentioned cake all night. I've behaved myself today. Those lovely no swimming signs, and I'm going to also credit Liv Collier, who is in the chat tonight as well, who swims near me. Those no swimming signs, they make a really good hanger for your towel and your dry robe and your bag. Use them, hide them, go and have a swim, because that's how we've got here, because people are swimming. Keep doing it, go all the places, break down those boundaries so that we can carry on having these conversations. Matt, over to you.
Last minute.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you, guys. Just a couple of things to say to wrap up. Yeah, I won't labour the point too much, but please do make a donation. It really does help. Yes, so Owen just mentioned ShAFF. Some of you might not be familiar. It's a Sheffield Adventure Film Festival. We're coming up to year 18, I believe. Anna might correct me. We might be 19 now. Quite old, really. We'll be on March the 3rd until the 5th. One of my jobs to do tomorrow is to approach Owen to see what we can do to bring soup and some of what we've been talking about tonight to the actual festival in person, so that we are not just limiting ourselves to on screen action. So watch this space, but we'd love to kind of get some of you guys there doing some talks, some workshops, whatever. Maybe organise some swims that weekend in the Peak District. One of the things that cropped up in the chat, we will share the transcript of the chat. We'll share it with everybody who was on tonight and with the speakers, as well as the video. But one of the things that came up in the chat, which maybe didn't get touched upon, Bob mentioned it a few times, was data. Somebody mentioned, might have been Fiona, said that we've got 7 million people swimming in the UK now. With 7 million people, there is a scope for some large amount of data there, and I'm sure that data might help to interest politicians, let alone water companies. So that may be something we can talk about in future. We're just flagging that up.
Swimmer's perspective presentation, some of the sources for figures that we've used. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for sticking with us, guys. Hope you enjoyed the evening, and we'll see you at future talks, I hope. And we'll email you all the resources and details and PayPal links and transcripts and video links, etc. tomorrow.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone who attended.
Yeah, and thanks, Anna, for your keeping everything smooth.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, and I'd just like to say a big thanks to the bunch of people who are on this screen with me. I've learned such a lot on my journey.
Great. Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.